Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Town Council Parking Authority Redevelopment Agency meeting of September 19th, 2011. As I call meeting to order, I'd ask that everyone turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate so that we do not disturb the meeting. And I'd ask Madam Clerk to call roll.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Rice.
Here.
Mayor Joe Przinsky.
Here. As is our tradition for the Pledge of Allegiance, we invite members of our youth community who are in leadership roles to lead us in the pledge tonight. And we are very fortunate to have the 2011 Youth Citizens of the Year who are going to lead us tonight. These awards are given to youth who have made significant contributions to the community and are considered role models for other young people. These youth will be awarded local and state commendations at an October 1st ceremony at the Youth Park. The youth will also participate in the holiday tree lighting on December 2nd and will start the Christmas holiday parade with a whistle on December 3rd. I'm going to go down to the podium and introduce them to you and read a little bit about each of them. And ladies and gentlemen, after I've introduced you and read your biography, then come forward and join me up here. The first is Joe Chadwick. Joe is a sixth grade student at Fisher Middle School. While attending Dave's Avenue School, he served on the safety patrol to help create a safer environment for other students. He volunteered half of his lunch hour each day, organizing games for first graders by gathering children who are isolated, observed, or playing unsafely, and organized an activity to include them in a game. He's described as he's an outstanding young man who takes pride in taking responsibility to serve his community and others without looking for a reward or compensation. Let's thank Joe and welcome him forward. Joe? Our next Youth Citizen of the Year is Ruth Cormier. Ruth is currently attending West Valley College. By her own initiative, she started Cards for Kids, that's with a K, Cards for You, and Cards for Soldiers. These are organizations that make greeting cards for people in need, including hospital patients and soldiers overseas. Personally, she's made 13,000 cards, and her organizations have sent tens of thousands of cards to people all over the world. She volunteers her time at Kids Club programs, Dorcas Circle, and Hugs and Stitches at Hillside Church. Ruth is described as an individual who has gained the attention of many with her generous giving of time and energies. She has demonstrated a true volunteer's heart. Ruth. Our next recipient is Michael DeBole. Michael's a freshman at Los Gatos High School, very active in the community, and while attending Fisher Middle School, contributed over 200 hours of community service to a wide variety of organizations, including Los Gatos Public Library, Los Gatos Little League, Los Gatos Recreation Summer Program, Toys for Tots, and various Catholic charities. Through his participation with Toys for Tots, Michael has noticed that gifts for teens were always underrepresented. In comparison to toys for younger children, and because of that, Michael launched Treasures for Teens in an effort to generate more gifts appropriate for needy teens. Michael DeBole is described as a rare individual who has shown innovation and creativity by initiating his very own community service project, having witnessed a need. Michael. And our last recipient is Jordan Sanford. Jordan is a freshman at Presentation High School. She's very active in the community, and while attending Hillbrook, served as the co-head of student council, and she led a gift card drive for the San Jose Family Shelter. She also helped organize and run a blood drive on campus and is involved in the community, where she serves monthly at Envision Georgia Travis Center, the San Jose Family Shelter, and other projects through the National Charity League. Jordan is described as an enthusiastic, positive, and motivated young woman in everything she's involved with. Jordan. And we have one other person who is not able to make it with us tonight, I believe, Michaela Jose. She's a senior at Westmont. She served as the Associated Student Body President last year and has been a part of ASB since 2008. She regularly volunteers at our church, local schools, and community events such as the Los Gatos Rotary, the Lobster Feed. Also, she donated her time by serving as choreographer for various middle school productions in her community. Michaela is described as an amazing individual who is always volunteering to help with school activities, even if it involves doing very undesirable tasks, such as cleaning up after a school dance. In her absence, but to thank her as well, let's applaud Michaela. Now, I think there's no question in our mind why these young people have been chosen to be our citizens of the year for 2011. We are privileged as a community to have such wonderful young leaders who we run into every day doing things that in some cases adults fail to do. We are blessed, and therefore we want to honor them, and we thank them for being with us tonight. Now I'm going to ask them to lead us in the pledge, and so if you'd all stand. Where's my...
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's thank our leaders.
And to the parents of these wonderful young people, thank you very much for bringing them to us tonight. They wouldn't be here if you weren't here. Thank you very much. And one more time for our young leaders. Now they're all going home and doing homework, obviously. Our next item on our agenda is our closed session report. Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. The council met in closed session as duly noticed as required. Council took no action, and there's nothing to report out.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is our council and town manager reports. But I'd also remind the audience that if you wish to speak on items on tonight's agenda, please fill out one of those buff cards in front of you at your seats and bring it up to our clerk on my left, okay? And that would be for anything on the agenda tonight. So council and town managers. Council, is there anything you wish to report? Seeing none, Madam Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'd like to remind the community of several upcoming events. First, beginning this Friday, September 23rd, we have Screen on the Green in Oak Meadow Park, where we'll be showing the popular family movie Up. So please come and join the community to see that movie in the park. On Saturday, then, more for the adults, we have the Wine Walk, and that will be downtown. That's an event sponsored by the Los Gatos Visitors Bureau. On Saturday, October 1st, before we meet in these chambers again, we have the garage sale. And then on Sunday, October 2nd, we have Second Chance Week, or Day. And that will be at the Adult Recreation Center, where you can make donations for families in need. And then finally, we have our boards and commission recruitment now going on. The deadline is Thursday, October 13th. We actually have 21 vacancies on 9 boards and commissions, so there's plenty of opportunities for many members of the community to apply for those positions. And then I would like to introduce Carrie Harris for tonight's Did You Know? This will be on emergency management, and this continues our series on this very important matter. Carrie?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thanks for having me. The Emergency Preparedness Strategic Goals Work Plan was developed with the guidance and the assistance of the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee of the Council, and it was based on the strategic goals that were set forth by the Council a few months ago. We have focused on 6 primary areas in the Emergency Preparedness Work Plan. The first revolves around our Community Emergency Response Team, the CERT team program, where we are trying to develop more neighborhood involvement. And in fact, we have 2 new neighborhoods that will be coming online, so we're making great progress there. The second area is the Los Gatos Prepared Safe at Home project. We have no less than 12 separate events that will be happening next month, October, the Emergency Preparedness Month here in Los Gatos. And so that will be happening at various institutions around town. The third area is our personal emergency preparedness. This is a program that was developed by the Santa Clara County Fire Department, and we have engaged in a strategic partnership with them to bring PEP, personal emergency preparedness, to Los Gatos. We have actually had 1 class session already, and we'll have more throughout the year. The fourth area is drills and exercises. A fundamental part of emergency preparedness, especially amongst response organizations, is to have drills, training, and exercises, and we have actually 3 of those planned for October involving CERT team and emergency operations staff. The fifth is a measurement, developing a tool to measure the level of preparedness of our community that we can look next year and see if we've actually accomplished anything through these efforts, and if not, or if so, tailor those efforts for maximum efficiency. And then finally is the fire and flood evacuation plan. This is a plan that has been developed as part of our emergency operations plan now to be able to evacuate people from areas that would be flooded in the event of a failure of the Lexington-Lenahan Dam, or evacuate from the wildfire hillside zones in the event of a fire in those areas. So we've made great progress there. We have signs designed and basically a plan. We're moving forward most rapidly on the flood evacuation plan process, and then again working with the fire department for the wildfire plan. So if anyone has questions or needs more information about the work plan, the phone number and address for my office is there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you, Sergeant Harris. Questions from council? I do want to make a couple of comments, Sergeant. Councilwoman McNutt and I are the members of the council who are on the ad hoc committee, and we were given this report probably a month or so ago as the response to a council action in our January retreat, in which we outlined emergency preparedness, a very significant issue for our community. And I just want to say with Sergeant Harris and his team, including Ms. Jackie Rose, who's our new emergency liaison, for us, we see this as very exciting and an opportunity for the community to become completely prepared. We know that we've been the subject of events in the past, and we will be subject of events in the future that will cause us to respond as a community and to take care of ourselves for at least 72 hours when an emergency such as a wildland fire, an earthquake, or a flood as a result of dam failure would come our way. And the intent in these next 2 years, and this was a 2-year plan, to make sure that we are as completely prepared as we possibly can be. I definitely appreciate all the work done by Sergeant Harris and his team, and Councilwoman McNutt and I were very much impressed with the level of detail given, and we look forward as a community to becoming more and more prepared through your efforts, Sergeant. So thank you again for presenting this, and I remind Council this is the first item on tonight's agenda for our approval. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, then, Madam Manager, any further manager matters that you need to address? Okay. Then that brings us to the consent agenda. The consent agenda are those items on the council tonight's council issues that can be acted on in a single motion. They are open to be evaluated by our community and by the council. And I'd ask, first of all, is there any member of council who wishes to pull an item? Councilwoman McNutt.
I'd like to pull item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is pulled. Any other item on the agenda to be pulled? Any member of the audience, any member of our public wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, so item 3 will be seen after our public hearing. That would be public hearing number 10 on the agenda, and we will hear that as other business at the end of that particular item. So can I have a motion? Yes.
Move to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item 3.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I think I have to abstain from item 4 because I wasn't present during the public hearing.
Okay. If you choose to do that, you may do that. Any other comments? All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? I don't think I heard a second. I heard a request to abstain.
I'll second.
Okay, then we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda without item 3 and with an abstention from Council Member Leonardis for number 4, you said? Mr. Leonardis?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think I also have to abstain from 4. So
Okay, well, I didn't hear anybody say aye yet. We're agreed? Okay. So we have another abstention. So for item number 4, it would be Councilmember Leonardis and Councilmember Rice. Other than that, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously with the 2 abstentions for item 4 and item 3 pulled. And that brings us then to the verbal communications part of the evening. And in verbal communications, we have the opportunity to hear from our public on any item that is not on the agenda tonight. So this has to be something that we're not going to review a little later on. So we do have a couple of cards for verbal communications. And I would ask as you come forward, if you just introduce yourself at the microphone, and we would appreciate that. Tim Boyd is our first presenter. Mr. Boyd?
Good evening. My name is Tim Boyd, town resident for 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, town council members, and town staff. Before I get started with what I wanted to say, can I just get a quick show of hands for the people that I contacted
Mr.
either
Boyd,
about the...
No. Address everything to us in council, okay? And let me just ask you a question. This is not on the agenda, okay? Council
Sure.
can take no action. Is it your request
I'm not asking you to.
Is it your request that members of the audience who are going to support your position acknowledge that tonight?
Yes, I've asked those who didn't care to speak, just
I would
raise your
ask
hands and show
that
their presence.
that make your presentation, And then at the end, if we have people who agree with what you've said, then we'll ask them to acknowledge that, okay?
Okay. All right. So I'm speaking as a concerned parent of two daughters at Van Meter School, specifically about the traffic issues as it affects the school and our neighborhoods. The crosswalks at Los Gatos Boulevard, Caldwell, and Kennedy that were redone after the Bluebird Lane project are unsafe. The traffic light is too short to allow kids crossing Los Gatos Boulevard to walk, as well as allow traffic exiting Caldwell to turn. The crosswalks are already faded after just a few months, and they're white. We're wondering if they could be painted yellow. The sidewalk, once it was redone, it was made smaller due to ADA constraints, which in the utility box was not put underground. So kids are literally standing in the street waiting for lights to change in the way. I'm concerned about this because I think it's just an accident waiting to happen. I know that a crosswalk was made and upgraded at Highway 9 in Missoula after a child was injured. I'm not sure how seriously it was, but I'd prefer to have some changes made to this intersection before an accident does take place. Additionally, over 3 years ago, I tried to organize, start the traffic calming petition in our neighborhood, and as of yet, we're still in the queue, and we still have a few more months to go. So I'm concerned that the situation, that the traffic calming process takes too long. There's definitely problems. There was a physical assault out in front of my house last week due to people speeding through the neighborhood, and like to extend an invitation to any town council members who want to come out and see this situation from a walker's perspective and a student's perspective and our neighbor's perspective. So that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Is there any members of the audience who, having heard Mr. Boyd, wish to acknowledge your agreement with his position? Would you raise your hands, please? All right, duly noted. And for your information, Mr. Boyd, I was actually out there on Thursday and observed under that intersection, and it's a very complicated intersection. And Madam Manager, would you like to address that for a second?
We have received communication regarding this issue and are working on following up with the residents. And as to the traffic calming effort, as you acknowledge that you are in the queue, given staff resources, we do need to approach those one at a time, and this area is in the queue, but we will be responding to the specific questions in the near future.
And Madam McNutt wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Boyd, I know that there's probably no money on the part of the school district or the town to do a crossing guard. I'm assuming that you think a crossing guard would be helpful?
I think there's a variety of methods that might be used. I know a crossing guard, if one can be done, is probably not going to be able to be done till next year. I'm talking to some parents about trying to just organize something where parents can go out on a more interim basis to help just be out there to...
You actually read my mind. That's exactly where I was going, because I'm very familiar with that intersection. I'm usually driving north and watching all of the maneuvers, and of course everyone is in such a hurry to get to work they can't stop for a second, let people cross the street. It's very annoying. But I do notice that there are so many parents accompanying their children to school, and I just wondered if there could be, I don't know what the legal liability would be, but if there could be a volunteer effort on the part of parents to, in the interim, do some kind of crossing guard coordination with PD and the school district, just to offer some immediate sense of safety there.
Well, I know as you're coming down Kennedy to turn to get to Los Gatos Boulevard, that from what one of my neighbors has told me, that there's a no right turn on red sign. There's no sign.
Children or parent present.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you for adding that. There's no sign of like that on Caldwell. So I think at the very least, a sign of that should be put on Caldwell. The sidewalks are already faded, that it's only been a month of school, and the sidewalks were just painted last late spring, I think. So whoever has done the job didn't do it very adequately. And moving the crosswalk over to the other side of I guess Caldwell and Kennedy. It's nobody's using that because they're afraid that people are going to get hit as they're turning right. Cars coming down off Kennedy, turning right onto Los Gatos Boulevard. So I know one of the other people here is going to speak to that as well. So
Yeah, it's a very intense period of time, but it's a short period of time.
yeah,
I mean, it's 20 to 30
something
minutes.
30 minutes
Yeah.
can make, that's when the problem is. It's a problem in the afternoon, to a lesser degree at lunchtime with the kindergartners leaving, so. But
Appreciate that comment, sir. And we do have another speaker, Tom Grogan.
Yes, well, my name's Tom Gauguin. I've actually been a resident of the town for close to 20 years now. Lived in my current location on Kennedy Road for the last about 10 years. And I think Tim's being really polite, so I'm surprised at this complete disregard for the safety of our children. We all know it takes years to get a permit through this town, and yet it's really shocking to see that 19 homes were built on that corner, right in that one spot, and the only way they exit is through Caldwell onto Los Gatos Boulevard. And as a result, there's been, as a part of this process, there was absolutely no regard, one might even say willful neglect, to the safety of the children who are crossing through that area to get to school. So I'll give you some examples. The 19 homes were built, but there was no removal of these structures that Tim pointed out that sit on the corner. Whether you guys are familiar with this or not, but there's either it's PG&E or telephone equipment or something. There's poles. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and all we did as a town was add more stuff to that corner, blocking people from actually getting across that intersection. Now, that's one thing. So town performed a traffic survey, but they did it in the summertime. Again, willfully neglecting the opportunity to see what would happen when children are actually passing through that intersection during school time. The town designed a traffic flow and lighting that specifically favors automobiles. To be specific, there's right turns on red lights allowed. The lights go green coming out of Kennedy at the same time that the lights permitting people to cross the crosswalks turn white to encourage, for students to cross the street. So anybody coming out of Kennedy or coming out of Caldwell thinks they have the right of way, and they turn right into traffic. I myself was nearly hit just the other day walking my child to school. Now, the other thing that happened is that the town apparently is encouraging more homes to be built along Los Gatos Boulevard, has several projects in planning right now, as I understand it, and yet there are no structural improvements planned for this area, this intersection, which will suffer from increased traffic flow if and when those projects go through. So I'll show you his other pictures. This is a bunch of students standing, waiting to go to school, trying to get across the street at Caldwell and Kennedy. You can see that there's absolutely no place to stand on the street. This is very typical, car pulling through the crosswalk. This is the Porsche that pulled around a car on Caldwell, to get out. When one car was stopped, you'll notice they were in the crosswalk, but they were stopped for pedestrians. The other car pulled around and nearly struck the kid back there, who now tells me he's afraid to drive his bicycle to school. And finally, there's a couple more photos. Here's the kids trying to cross in the other direction. They're stuck out in the middle of Los Gatos Boulevard. And this is my son trying to actually make his way to the crosswalk. Now, I got a long list of things
Thank you, Mr.
that I'd
Gauguin.
like to see done there.
I'm going to ask that, you've brought this to our attention, and your neighbors have brought this to our attention. We appreciate that. Staff is aware, and the staff will respond to you, I assure you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other individuals interested in speaking during verbal communications? Seeing none, then we're going to go to our public hearings. Now, I noticed that there were quite a number of you in the room who wanted to support the issues raised regarding Kennedy and Caldwell and the Boulevard. If you choose not to stay for the rest of the meeting, I would invite you at this point. You can sneak out if you so wish, but you can always stay. We don't want to, make you feel unwelcome. Yeah. That explains it. Okay. Not now. We've closed. All right, the next item on the agenda is item number 9. Item number 9 is an application for a plan development on Placer Oaks. The applicant is Cupertino Development Corporation, and this is a request for approval of a plan development amendment to allow an off-site below-market price housing unit on the property, zoned R1 8PD, APN 529-16073. There is a request for a continuance. The applicant is interested in contacting Habitat for Humanity for potential partnership for the below-market housing, and they have asked for a continuance to a date uncertain. I'm assuming that that may be something the council would like to approve. However, since we have members in our audience who perhaps are here for that, I'll invite you, if you're interested in speaking to this, to speak after our staff's presentation, and we will go ahead with that. Ms. Savage? Yes, Madam McNutt.
Mayor, if there's going to be a staff report and discussion, I'll need to leave the room. I have to recuse on this item because of conflict of interest. I thought it was going to be just...
Even if it's a motion to continue, you can't vote on that either, so.
No, but I think I need to leave the room apparently if you're going to have discussion. So goodbye.
Rather passive aggressive, I'd say. Yes.
Just for
Madam Attorney?
Just for clarification, if there's anything of a substantive matter and you have a council member that needs to recuse themselves, then that would be the appropriate mechanism. If it's just a procedural to a motion to continue, and that's all that's before the council, then this council member need not leave the dais.
So she's betwixt in between. I assumed that Ms. Savage was here to make the staff report, and she could make the request of the applicant at that time. Yes. Madam Manager?
Perhaps if we could find out if there was anyone to speak on it, and if not, I don't believe that Ms. Savage needs to make a report. If no one is here to speak on it, then you could just continue to move to continue it.
That's a possibility. Is there anyone in our public tonight who wishes to speak to item 9? Seeing none, then Ms. Savage, you need not make a report? Okay. Then we would need a motion to continue. Vice Mayor?
I'll move to continue this item to a date uncertain.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Madam McNutt is still in seat. Duly noted for the record. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously, and this is a date uncertain. So we will see this at a certain point in the future, but we are not certain what that point will be. That brings us then to item 10. Item 10 is a continuance of a council meeting in which the request was a conditional use permit application U11006. It's a project located at 91101 and 109 West Main. Property owner Sue Farwell, applicant Lisa Rohrer. And as you recall, this was continued for further action by the applicant and staff to evaluate a number of issues that the council raised at our last meeting. Now, Ms. Savage, would you care to speak to this issue?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. This item was last heard on August 15th, as you mentioned, where the council directed staff and the applicant to address a number of issues and questions, including quantifying the amount of proposed retail and making it potentially the primary focus of the application. So to begin, the first item was meal service versus food service. The existing alcoholic beverage policy requires meal service with alcoholic beverage service. It does not consider appetizers such as popcorn and potato skins as a meal. The applicant maintains their proposal for making food service available during all hours of operation. This differs from requiring meal service in that a patron could order a glass of wine without ordering food. The proposed food service would include soup, sandwiches, and Italian small plates. There are two components to consider when evaluating a meal versus food, and there are two components to consider in this particular question. The first is whether it's a meal or food, and then the second is whether or not the meal or food should be required or just made available. The applicant's request for making food available is similar to what staff is considering including for the upcoming alcoholic beverage policy modifications and similar to recently approved uses. The revised conditions include specifying that food service is required with alcoholic beverage service and that small plates are considered food. The second item was community benefit, and the applicant is offering up to $2,500 to be used to the purchase of a park bench or replacing downtown banners, and is open to alternative uses to that community benefit. Staff is concerned about the phrase up to, and the revised community benefit condition requires the full $2,500. A finding for community benefit is required. The council directed the applicant to consider removing the outdoor seating, which the applicant has done, and staff has revised the conditions of approval to prohibit outdoor seating. The applicant removed the term pizza from the business name to support the revised business concept, which describes the business as a retail marketplace, wine establishment, and cafe, and the revised conditions define it as such. The conditions require that the use operate in strict conformance with the conditions of approval. The marketplace retail component is a required part of the business and would require more than strictly wine sales. To further ensure wine is not the only retail product, staff has included a modified required retail space condition noted in tonight's desk item that would specify the type of retail items that would be required to be part of the sales. The applicant has reduced the number of seats from 44 to 35. 31 are shown on the floor plan with the option of adding 4 for larger parties. It should be noted that the option for those 4 additional seats was suggested by staff to allow flexibility for larger groups without the applicant coming back for a conditional use permit modification. The applicant's revised project description proposes 40% of the commercial space, not including vertical displays, to be retail. Multiplying 40% by the 1,300 square foot commercial space equates to 520 square feet. Although the applicant's floor plan seems to illustrate less than 40%, staff provided a condition of approval in the revised conditions that requires the applicant to show and dimension at least 520 square feet of retail to ensure that this is part of the proposal. Neither the existing CUP or the subject CUP modification state a specific square footage for the retail component of each of those uses, but both do include floor plans, and staff use these to evaluate and estimate the existing and proposed retail components. And we'll walk you through a few floor plans right now. So this first one is the existing approved floor plan for that existing conditional use permit, and it covers both all 3 spaces, 91, 101, and 109 West Main. 109 West Main is the main part of this subject application before you tonight. This is also included in the existing CUP, which further describes the existing space at 109 West Main and how it's organized and what uses are there. You can see that there's the deli use here, wine bar use across this area here, and then retail on 3 parts. This next one was submitted by the applicant for the subject application and represents an existing floor plan or the current floor plan. This iteration of an existing or current floor plan is most similar to that approved floor plan which you saw. There are some changes where the wine bar, instead of being across here, is here, further back in the space. But you still have the deli counter here and the retail across these three walls. It should be noted that since this was submitted, there has been further changes within this space, and the retail has been moved. If you walk in there today, the deli counter remains. This is the most recent floor plan submitted by the applicant, and per the applicant, the blue represents retail, the orange represents food preparation, the green represents wine, and the pink represents the seating areas. This next slide shows the approved floor plan, both the larger one and then the smaller, more detailed one superimposed on that larger one, and the applicant's proposed floor plan here, placed side by side for comparison. And in order to estimate the square footage for both the existing and proposed uses, staff divided the 1,300 square feet first into quarters and then into eighths and so on. Using these estimates, the approved use has about 35.5% of the floor plan for retail, and the proposed has about 18.5%. Now this differs from the applicant's letter that states 40% will be retail, and you want to note that the categories within this table include the deli area in the food preparation area, which is different than what was shown in color on the applicant's floor plan, where the applicant includes this deli area as part of the retail. Now, typically, the food service component would be considered food preparation, but if you were to remove the deli area from this proposed food preparation area and move it into the retail, although it's not direct retail, has some type of retail component in that a customer could come in and buy a prepared salad, although staff wouldn't typically consider that retail. If you did that, you create a situation where you have 23.5% of food preparation and 29% of retail and deli area. It should be noted that while staff compares the proposed application to the existing CUP, the applicant does look at what today's floor plan is as opposed to the existing approved CUP when they compare what their proposal is. Based on the proposed seating area, you could reasonably anticipate about 29 to 40 seats, depending on the configuration and the type of seating. And now this range is there based on the different building code assumptions and calculations that they use for occupancy. So a reasonable seating area, staff has provided that range only based on building code calculations. The final component of Town Council's direction was to consider a way to maintain the retail use in that space in consideration that the kitchen equipment was mobile. The proposal includes the addition of a pizza oven and stovetop in addition to the existing deli area. In the event that Town Council finds merit with the revised proposal, but would require the new cooking equipment to be removed, either with a change of use or ownership, staff included a condition to require the additional restaurant equipment's removal for council's consideration. An operational agreement signed by both the business owner and the property owner would be required, similar to what was required for Cardino's. Council could also consider further reducing the seating or increasing the square footage of the retail component if they so choose. The connection to Los Gatos Roasting at 91 and 101 West Main Street has been raised for concerns. Los Gatos Roasting does not have a conditional use permit or an alcoholic beverage license that will allow them to serve alcoholic beverages. And the applicant's revised floor plan actually includes a full-height iron gate to separate those two businesses, which the council could require to be locked at certain times. The council could also consider permanently sealing this opening. And as mentioned in tonight's desk item, staff believes this sealed opening would require a separate conditional use permit. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Council, questions for Ms. Savage? We'll start with the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Could you go back to the retail component slide for me for just a moment? So I just want to make sure I understood what you said. The retail deli / food preparation at 34.5%, that includes both the deli counter, so to speak, and the full food prep in the back.
Correct.
And you said if we were to choose to consider the deli portion as retail, as part of the retail square footage, we'd still, the map as drawn would still be less than 40%?
Yes.
And what was the percentage you gave?
It would be 29.5.
29.5. Okay, thank you. And then a couple questions from the staff report. You said that the community benefit is typically less than what council's accepted in the past for similar types of impacts. What has been the typical community benefit? This type of app?
In the past, there has been both monetary and non-monetary community benefit values or community benefit offers. And the values of the monetary community benefit, there is a wide range in the range of PM peak trips that result from this project. And I don't know if a range would help because the range is so wide, but just something to consider when you look at community benefit is, does this community benefit offered by the applicant negate the traffic impacts that would result from the project?
Okay, thank you. If I may continue.
Please.
At the end of, I guess it's point 4 in the staff report, page 3, it says staff still believes the proposal will result in changing a retail use with ancillary deli use to a restaurant use with ancillary retail. I'm just curious what that tipping point is, if from staff's perspective.
For a retail use to be ancillary, it wouldn't necessarily just be that it's less than 50%. There's certainly going to be situations where it's more of a gray area. There's not an exact definitive number, and so there you do get that gray area. So staff can't provide an exact tipping point, but certainly based on the past council approval of that ancillary restaurant use of the deli counter, it was more of a less than 20%, but that was of the entire space where a lot of it was used as office and storage. Staff would think that something certainly a smaller range than certainly less than 50% would be ancillary, and perhaps even less than 40, but ultimately it would be up to town council's interpretation.
Okay. Last couple. With the revisions that have been done, was there conversation with the applicant, and I'll ask them as well, obviously, but with regards to an operating agreement and I guess, a separate CUP for this address?
Both of those topics have come up, and how and what is most appropriate to proceed, and whether or not the applicant is amenable to that. Certainly, you do want to confirm with the applicant. It wouldn't be necessary to do an operational agreement, although with the details of this particular application, staff would recommend that to give the town council a better comfort level and assuredness of the operation operating as agreed upon.
That's fine for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to community benefit, because even after you answered the Vice Mayor's questions, I'm still having a hard time understanding what you're saying. You're suggesting $2,500 I think the CUP application that they have is around $6,000. Can you give me a comparison? For example, what did we do with Gardinos, or what did we do with James Randall? So I can understand better where we've been in the past to figure out where we're going to go now.
Absolutely. One moment, please. I think Gardino's was around a 9 p.m. peak trip, where this one is 13. And Gardino's had 2 public benches, I believe. One moment. Yeah, 2 downtown public benches, which equated to, I believe it was around $4,000. So it's a little less. Let's see. And so actually they were 9 p.m. peak hour trips. And so you get that equation, 19 p.m. peak hour trips to an approximately 4,000 community benefit. But then you also have a wider range where you have 9 p.m. peak hour trips to a $15,000 community benefit monetary fund.
Please.
And did you have that information for James Randall or Pedro, some other use that we have modified fairly recently?
So Pedro's had no resulting community benefit or change in traffic. They were not adding seats. One moment. And similarly, there was no traffic impacts on the James Randall site, just given the small amount of seating that they added.
Other questions or comments? Councilman Leonardis?
Picking up where Councilwoman Spector left off, do you have that information on SB 17 or Rootstock, is what it's known to be now?
I don't have that information available in front of me, but staff can certainly obtain that information during the public hearing part.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments, Ms. McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question on trying to reconcile the operational agreement language and the kitchen cooking equipment language, because the way I'm reading it on the proposed language on the operation agreement, should this business owner sell the business to someone else, they can continue to operate it as long as they meet with community development and police chief and agree to the terms of the operating agreement. So let me stop there and see if I understand that part to be correct.
There are 2 operating agreements, so is that language that you see in both of those operating agreement conditions?
I have no idea. It's on page 6 of the staff report.
It was the intention of staff to recommend that any change in ownership could potentially require the conversion back to retail, and that would associate that operational agreement condition that you see there on page 6 with the condition immediately above that begins on page 5.
And that was going to be part 2 of my question. Was it didn't make sense to me that on one hand they could sell the business to someone else who agreed to operate it the same way, and yet if they sell the business according to the previous, then the stove has to come out, which kind of makes it hard to run a restaurant. So the way this is currently set up, we would be prohibiting this business from ever selling to someone else.
And so thank you for catching that. Certainly if it was the town council's discretion to require that kitchen and cooking facility condition, where if there were any change in ownerships or uses, that it would have to be removed, that cooking facilities removed, that operational agreement condition that is contained on page 6 that would go along with that condition to remove the kitchen equipment would have to be revised so that there isn't that language to then sell the business with that cooking equipment.
Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Spector.
Thank you. Let's circle back to what Mrs. McNutt just brought up. If there is, if this is approved in some fashion, and then somewhere down the line, there was a desire to sell, do we have, I mean, my sense was that the staff's operational agreement intended to assure the town that the use would continue in the way that it has been approved by the town. Is that what you're doing on page 6, or are you doing something else?
The intention of the operational agreement condition on page 6 was something else that was entirely tied into the kitchen and cooking equipment condition to be removed. There is an alternative operational agreement condition that staff recommends that begins on page 4 and ends on page 5, and that language is in there to assure the town that the operation continues to operate strictly with the approved conditions of approval, but does not assume that the kitchen and cooking equipment condition is included.
Please.
And then if you go to the proposed conditions on Exhibit 4A, you have an operational agreement provision as part of paragraph 6. Am I to understand then that that operational agreement is the one that's contained in our staff report, pages 4 or 5?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? I have a question regarding the, it'd be item 1 under discussion on page 2 of the staff report. The second to last sentence states, the applicant's proposal falls into a new use category and would be consistent with the proposed modifications of the alcohol beverage policy. Okay. And when we define the retail deli food preparation, and the issue is restaurant versus retail, this new category is not defined as restaurant or retail. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the intent that the council had in our last meeting was to create the deli marketplace Oakville orientation. Is the staff defining retail in this case specifically as items for sale versus, and would those items for sale, not versus, would those items for sale include the delicatessen?
I'm going to back up and then answer your question. In regards to the alcoholic beverage policy, this particular use, a marketplace or retail marketplace, is something that staff is considering as a new definition, potentially under the alcoholic beverage policy, potentially something that would be go into more of a retail wine marketplace, something along those lines. And then to answer your question, staff would consider the preparation of sandwiches to order and salads to order as food service or restaurant, as the town code currently defines. We would consider retail or specialty retail in the case where the items are pre-made. If you go into perhaps icing on the cake is a good example where the cookies are pre-made. You go in, you get your food, and you leave. Now there are specific details to that specialty retail versus food service, but that's the overall the big picture part of it. In this case, because the sandwiches are made to order and not necessarily pre-made, staff would consider that a restaurant use. There is a portion of the deli counter, such as the cheeses and perhaps the meats, that would be considered pre-made and specialty retail. So there's two portions within, or two types of uses within that one area.
So do we consider the section of Safeway, for example, in which sandwiches are made to order, does that make Safeway a restaurant use?
It does have an ancillary restaurant type use. Now that, in that instance, you're in a much larger space where the cafe or the deli is a lot smaller component of the retail use of the supermarket.
Okay, I'm trying to get my arms around what we're really attempting to do with this space, because we asked the applicant to create an environment that was imitative of Oakville or another aligned land use that would create an ambiance, but not a restaurant as its primary. To me, when I think of restaurant, I think food prepared and tables and chairs, and people sit and their food is served. But we've got a hybrid here that seems to be somehow now a cross between a wine bar and a delicatessen and a takeout operation, and then has a restaurant component. And we're focusing on how we establish retail as its primary. But for me, the issue, and I need staff's clarification here, because we're looking at a piece of this that seems to me not to act as a restaurant when you're talking about the delicatessen counter. And that's, I understand how you did your calculation, but without having that clarification, or without having a council determination that this is actually more this hybrid retail with a food service versus a restaurant, I have some difficulty determining, therefore, how the exact calculation of square footage is determined. So back to the question of square footage. Is the square footage that the staffs use to determine what is retail and what is restaurant, is it the floor space taken by the restaurant, which would be the kitchen and the tables and chairs? Or does it include the table for the wine service? Does it include the counter where food, if it's prepared on, to order, that becomes restaurant? If they prepackage their sandwiches, then that becomes retail. I think that we've got angels dancing on the pin, and I think that we've made some mathematical calculations, but I need to know what the validity factor is in this.
And you raise the point tonight. Staff looks at this use under the town code, and the town code doesn't have a retail marketplace definition. Unfortunately for this application, we have a restaurant definition and we have a retail definition. And so what's before town council tonight is whether or not the proposed hybrid use that we perhaps have seen in the past with some wine establishment applications, whether or not that's appropriate for this particular space, and whether or not part of it can be considered retail, part of it can be considered restaurant, or if the use as a whole creates a unique use that is acceptable to the town council and right for that space. In terms of the square footage, it's very much an estimate. There's no dimensions that are provided or that staff used for this. We literally looked at the floor plans and divided these spaces, so it's very much an estimate. You can see from the lines that even dividing those spaces into rectangles, the actual uses between the seating, between the food preparation area, retail, deli, wine, they don't fit into those rectangles exactly. So there's very much an estimation going on there. With the numbers that we provided, the restaurant or food preparation, you could certainly define the restaurant space, the quote-unquote restaurant, as the seating percentage. and then the food preparation percentage, and perhaps remove that deli percentage, so that you would then have the food preparation without the deli at 23.5%, and the seating at 34.5%, which would give you, I think, 58%. And then the remaining would be considered retail, where the deli is counted in the retail.
All right, and indulge me with one more question. Would you put the floor plan back up, please? Point out the doorway between those two sites. Okay. It seems to me that space has been deleted from the possibility of retail because you have to access that door. If that door were removed, as is one of the potentials here tonight, and that wall space was recaptured, or in addition, that floor space that is currently seen as the ramp in were recaptured, any estimate of the square footage that would allow for increase of retail?
That portion of where the ramp encompasses the floor space was actually not removed in the calculation, so that is considered part of the retail square here.
Okay, so that's already been factored.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Then I think we're going to ask the applicant to come forward. We have two cards, and I would say, since the applicants are going to share 10 minutes, the applicant is Pasquale Romano and Lisa Rohrer. And whomever wishes to speak first, please feel comfortable.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Lisa and I are still extremely excited about this project. We attempted to take all the feedback from the last meeting and incorporate it into the application. We have a brief presentation here that'll take you through how we address the concerns, and are happy to answer any questions after we go through this. To recap the modifications from the last meeting, first of all, we changed the name of the establishment to appeal to just the broader sense of what we're trying to do from a business plan perspective, to take away any bias towards any particular aspect of this business. We removed the proposed patio seating. It seemed like that was a fairly unanimous recommendation to us, so we are happy to go ahead and conform with that request. We've reorganized the interior seating to banquette style. You've seen it on the previous floor plan. We have a couple of different renditions that we'll show you in this presentation. That compresses the seating to a much more confined and well-defined area in the space, so we think it lends itself well to the combined use in the small square footage, also allowing us to raise the retail square footage. We've discussed with the town the seating. We've reduced it, as was described previously, from 44 to 31, with an option of going up to 35 if we had to entertain a large party. The community benefit, Lisa and my opinion on this is we don't have much clear guidance on what exactly it should be used for. That's not a criticism. We just we don't have a bias. We're happy to work with the town to resolve that one. We don't see it as a sticking point. So we'd like to try to come to some closure on that fairly quickly, and are happy to do that either in this meeting or offline. And then we are completely open to an operating agreement. Councilwoman McNutt, I think, summarized our goals with respect to that exceedingly well. All we want to be able to do is have any subsequent owner of the business, and Lisa and I, trust me, have no intention of not being the proprietors of this place, but things do happen and we have to plan. We have to plan for all cases. We would just like the business to be able to be operated in kind if it were transferred, right? Other than that, no other. We really have no other issue, and if that's the most effective way to deal with this, we're happy to comply with that. Okay, very quickly, what we also did, we realized in the last meeting that floor plans are a very bad way of conveying what you intend to do with a business. So what we did was we had a local artist take things that, the floor plan and the design concepts that can't be rendered in a floor plan and turn them into 2 sketches. One sketch standing in the exact center of the space looking towards the street, and the next sketch, which I'll show you in the slide, and it's in your packets, in the center of the space facing away from the street, so you get both vantage points. This is not so fictitious in that things like, for example, that takeaway case in the deli area, these fixtures have been identified. So dimensioning to fit within this space has been done appropriately. This drawing is to scale. We went through a lot of effort to tape off the existing space because the existing plans are not very representative of what's exactly there. It's been renovated several times, but these are as accurate as we can make the drawing, representing how we intend to render the food counter on the way in the deli area, how we intend to deal with the front retail, and then in the second slide here, as you look back, a much more wine retail focused back area. If you remember in the last meeting, I believe it was you, Mr. Mayor, that had a question as to how we were going to deal with the wine tasting. How we intend to do it is this table can be used during hours that are appropriate to conduct that sort of business as a wine tasting area. The necessary wine retail behind it. These fixtures have been identified to hang the bottles in a very dense but decorative way, and we intend to keep the inventory downstairs, so the areas here will only be displaying single bottles. So we can actually display quite a large wine inventory in this area, and it's been, as you can see, pretty well detailed out. What you also see in this area here is confining the seating to banquette style really well defines the area that we have seating. And if you look at the vertical display that we have here, we are not counting that in our retail square footage calculation that you'll see in the subsequent slide after this one. This one here depicts, this is an actual picture of the iron gate in place. It currently is not installed in the space, but it can be. It's in storage on the location. We are happy to bring it back into operation, and there was some discourse here before we got our chance to speak. We are happy to either leave it open, leave it closed, or conform to the town's regulations on what hours we should either keep it open or keep it closed. We really don't have a bias either way. Here on the square footage calculation, what we've got, we've color-coded our floor plan here as to how we've done the calculation. On the next slide, I'll go through the percentage, but you can see it's roughly 345 square feet in food prep, 257 in seating, 198 in general circulation, just the pathways through that really aren't allocated to anything, 305.5 for general retail, wine retail's an additional 145, and other, which include bathrooms and stairwells, which are really unutilizable space at about 105. What that leads you to is if you net out the bathroom and stairwell, which are really unusable back here for anything, you're left with 1,053 square feet of usable space. And if you take the two numbers from the previous slide, food prep and cafe seating, and sum them and say that's what the square footage allocated to food service would be, you're at 57.2% by our calculation on food service. And then when you add the general retail up front and the wine retail in the rear, you get to 451 square feet or 42.8%. So by our calculation, that's how we do the math. And then we plan on an additional wall of retail shelving. That's back in this area here, kind of trying to utilize the stairwell a little bit. So we will put some additional shelving there. We haven't counted that in the retail calculation. And it only comes a few inches into the floor space, so it'll give us another retail wall, and there's no load-bearing walls back there, so we don't have to build out into the existing space to support that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. The hybrid definition of a business that we're looking at is not new just to Los Gatos. There are actually trends in combining specialty retail and dine-in service. There is a trend in combining retail food, wine sales, beer and wine service, along with dine-in service. And those examples include Jones on 3rd in Los Angeles, Brooklyn Fair in Brooklyn, Fresh in Santa Rosa, and Red Hills Market in Oregon. I had the opportunity to go to Fresh in Santa Rosa and Red Hills Market in Oregon to familiarize myself with their offerings. And then this slide is really just to show you how serious we are about the retail, given my experience in specialty retail management, Whole Foods, and Oakville Grocery. Combining that experience with my wine buying experience and strategic marketing experience, I feel that the combined experience will actually facilitate new energy and vitality to this area. Last one. So our last slide, and again, the new name that we're proposing is 109, which actually means 109, and that's our address. Pat and I feel strongly that we have effective use of the available square footage, as well as encouraging customer traffic at all hours of the business day. 109 is keeping existing elements of Los Gatos Gourmet that customers rely on. Those are the wine retail, the specialty retail, weekly wine tastings, and key personnel. We feel that our business will fill a niche for Los Gatos, offering specialty retail items, wine sales, wine and beer service, along with value-driven menu items, which there's been a complaint around town that there's not enough low-cost places to grab a bite to eat, and we feel we're filling that need. And Pat and I both really share a passion for delivering sophistication, quality, and innovation at a modern price point for the Los Gatos community and beyond. And 109 is a fresh new concept for Los Gatos that will attract sophisticated, food-savvy customers from the surrounding areas. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd stay at the mic, and we'll see if council has questions or comments. We'll start with Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Do you want disclosures now?
Yes.
I will disclose that I met with the applicant.
Why don't we go down the line?
I also met with the applicant.
I met with Andrew Letton, consistent with the letter he gave us. I met with Terry Hope with regard to the passage between the two through uses, and with Sue Farwell, who walked me through the site with the map that we have before us.
Mr. Leonardis?
I also spoke with Ms. Rohr on the telephone. I spoke with Mr. Letton, who wrote the letter, on the telephone, and I spoke with Ms. Hope in person.
And I've had conversations with both of the individuals in front of us at the mic, and also with Mr. Linton and Terry Hope. And that was, I believe that's the extent of it. We've been doing this for quite a while now, so one or two meetings. So back to the question of questions. Madam McNutt.
Thank you. Well, I should throw in my phone conversation also with Ms. Hope. I didn't think it was a disclosable action because she's not the applicant, but I talked to a lot of residents, so do you have anything more you want to add to?
Yeah, I also talked on the phone with Mr. Letton and met in person with Mrs. Hope.
Okay.
Now I'm back to my questions.
Yes.
So I have three sets of questions for you. We'll start with the easiest one first. You want to change the hours of operation and open earlier. Can you just give me a reason what you're thinking there?
Primarily being open till 10. Right now, the Los Gatos Gourmet is open till 9, and we plan to have a dessert service, espresso coffee, and Italian desserts. So we want to be able to be open later to appeal to that after-movie crowd for desserts.
It was the earlier one that I was interested in. You want to open earlier, is what I was reading?
That's not.
No?
I don't know what the existing hours are.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the hours we have in the proposal are...
You have to speak to the mic.
Excuse me, yeah. The hours we have in the application are the hours we think would be best suited for the town. People tend to shop before lunch. the way we look at the spaces, it'll transform its use literally by hour. So in the morning, it'll be a primarily retail-focused location. Probably around lunchtime, it'll be a hybrid. Then it'll shift back to retail, and then dinner and later it'll be
May I
different.
just verify with staff that I'm reading this correct? On page 5, the current hours are 11 to 10 and 11 to 11 on the weekend, or Friday, Saturday, and it's switching to 10 to 9 during the week and 10 to 11 on the weekend. Is that correct?
That reflects a change in the applicant's proposal from the first proposal to the more recent one. The existing CUP was approved to open at 6 a.m., except for the wine bar that was supposed to open at 11 a.m. So for the wine service, if allowed at all hours in this subject application, it would be an hour earlier than the wine bar allowed today.
So did you understand what I just said? So the way it's currently phrased, you would be open Sunday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Friday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. Is that what your intention is? Yes. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. And, all right. The two more difficult ones, if, let's see, maybe the diagram that shows the swath of blue down the middle, whatever. Forget what you call that particular one. That one is a good one. I'm struggling with the gate between the two businesses. It's a totally separate business, and so I don't understand, especially when you look at a layout like this, why it wouldn't make more sense to have that become a real wall. Since they are totally separate businesses, which would get rid of that ramp and those handrails that stick out into your retail space. So can you make a persuasive argument to me as to why we shouldn't go in that direction?
No, we really
You don't care?
honestly don't. We'll
Well,
take whatever advice the town
That gives us an additional retail opportunity, so we're very open to that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my third question is, and last, Mayor, is on the number of seats. So let's start with the seats that are in the curved portion around the deli part in the front. What is the intention of those 4 seats?
Those would be the same seats that are here. So in the deli area here, if you were to come in at lunchtime and want to have a sandwich, it would be a convenient place to sit.
Okay. So it still is, it's feeling like too many seats to me. With that number of seats, it really, I think when you walk in, it gives the impression of a restaurant. So I guess my question to you is, what flexibility do you have in terms of your business plan on these seats? Do you have to have this number of seats according to your calculations? Or if we feel that there are too many seats, too much the impression of a restaurant, and we need to trim it back, is that going to destroy your business enterprise?
Well, we've removed a substantial number between the last meeting and this one, and we've compressed most of them into this area. Being down to 31 with, and eliminating the outdoor seating proposal, which albeit would only be used seasonally, we think we're down to pretty much the minimum required to maximally utilize the square footage in a way that makes it profitable.
Okay, and then on your request for flexibility in seating in case you have any special events, if we were going to go in that direction, that would have to be crafted in a way that's really quantified and structured so that you couldn't have a special event every day as a party.
Right.
Okay.
So just, in the working with the town, they've been very flexible. It was actually a suggestion by the town, a very constructive suggestion as to how we could deal with the reduction of seats, and we were happy to comply with that. We have enough space, say, in this general area to put in another 4-top, or in this general area to put in another 4-top, just on a basis where we could tighten the definition around when we could do that, we're happy.
Okay, maybe staff will be working on some language on that. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Ms. McNutt. Other questions, comments? Mr. Vice Mayor?
I'm going to concur with Councilwoman McNutt on the opening. I still have an issue with that because and I expressed that to Ms. Rohrer when I met with her. Two very different businesses, very different. We could end up with an indoor mall in downtown Los Gatos, putting openings between different buildings. So I just want to confirm you're okay with that, and you understand that means it's a separate conditional use permit for your business, separate from what's currently the coffee roasting company, correct?
Can I get a clarification? No issue with the mechanics. Does that trigger a brand-new process?
That's more a question for the attorney than for me or staff.
Do you want that question answered now, Mr. Mayor and Council?
It's a good idea.
Go ahead.
If the opening is closed from those two spaces, it should be processed as a separate new conditional use permit. The exact steps to take to obtain that final outcome of a separate conditional use permit, there are a couple of options contained in the staff report that we could discuss further if that's the direction that town council wanted to go. And those options do give council discretion as to how they wish to proceed.
So just for the benefit of the applicant,
Please.
I'm going to
curious
guess
myself.
the answer to that is not necessarily does it mean a brand new application or new process. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Are you comfortable with not necessarily?
I don't know how to be comfortable with
I
that, but if
know.
I have to, I will be.
Yes, okay.
We're mostly concerned about the timing because we're already 3 months into this, so.
Yes.
I understand. That answers my questions as well. Thank you.
Other questions from council? Mr. Leonardis?
I like what you've done with this. It's come a long way since the last meeting. It's much more clear. Obviously sounds like we've cleared up the issue of the access between the two spaces, which I think is greatly to your benefit considering the amount of community events that occur at the roasting company. Love the ornateness of the iron door, but perhaps something less permanent would be like a solid wooden door, which would create a barrier, which would give everybody the privacy they need and your separation between the two businesses, but may not necessarily need to have a whole new CUP prepared. That might be an option. Perhaps the CUP could still exist with the understanding that there's this permanent yet not permanent barrier. It can be opened or taken out in the future. So that might save some time for the applicant. I think everything else has pretty much been stated. I liked the idea of the lunch cart for the high school students. I hope you would still consider that should this be approved. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back to that door. If we go with Councilman Leonardis' recommendation, we could always nail the door shut, and then that would guarantee that no one would go in or out. But my preference would be that we actually legitimately isolate those spaces, which means to create a wall. And I would recommend to staff that before the night is out, we get some real clarification of that, because it seems to me that to have to renew from the beginning a conditional use permit process rather than to do an amendment to the process is counterintuitive. And so that would be something that we'll check back on a little later. So I guess my question for you is this: we have dueling interpretations of retail space, and according to your calculation, why don't you go to that slide that has that number up? Yeah, you hit the 42.8%. The issue for us, I believe, or the issue proposed was a 40% would be the tipping point, as asked, for a retail space as having sufficient dominance in the environment. I personally think that the issue of how we define food service, or how do we meld restaurant into that mix, has not yet been determined. But I think that there is certainly grounds for disagreement among all parties in terms of how you determine that. My sense is, I go back to what we asked of you, which was the marketplace concept. And if we could establish the marketplace, then that would be the dominant theme, and the restaurant component would have to be a submissive theme, so to speak. And in this particular case, as I look at that, I see the number of seats as one of the significant factors. I am not inclined to add the additional seats for special occasions. I think that, although as recommended by staff, it's a creative way of dealing with overflow. Standing is also a way to deal with overflow. And as soon as we start trying to add more seats, I think we start to make this more restaurant dominant. And there is some issue of our being able to monitor and control what we can't see. And I would rather be pretty clean about this. So those are two issues that I'm concerned about. And I would like a comment from you about why, given its current configuration, you don't see this as a restaurant. You see this more as a retail space and a marketplace concept. And how do you answer the staff's calculation really concretely at this time?
Well, as far as the calculations, we actually had an architect go in and measure everything. So we feel very confident about our calculations. And we're trying to weave in retail into the cafe experience, meaning that the items that our cook makes with the small plates and pizza are going to be sold. So that's the 00 flour, that's the salt, that's the San Marzano tomatoes. All those will be sold in retail, and they'll be utilized in the actual menu items. And so that's how we're playing the retail cafe theme together. We're weaving those two in. And I think that's quite unique, and that is something that we can showcase on the menu. You like those tomatoes, you can buy it here. Like the salt the chef's using on the focaccia, you can buy that here. So that's how we're working, having those two elements work in tandem.
Thank you. Any other comments, please?
Yeah. So I think it again, the business planning math that Lisa and I kept coming back to with this place is, you're starting out with a fairly limited amount of square footage. So what you have to do is timeshare the square footage as best as you can to make a business really fly in this area. So if you think about it by time of day, the area that is this seating, the bulk of the seating for the dine-in experience here, is only legitimately going to be utilized like any restaurant at lunchtime and at dinner. And if this were purely a restaurant, the rest of this place would be fairly empty for those other hours. This place makes good use of all the square footage by using this very nice piece of capital equipment, this pizza oven here, to be able to create things we can sell in retail. Our staff will prepare things that will be in the to-go counter that can be taken home and potentially either directly consumed or cooked at home, right? So we're thinking about pastas, takeaway pizza, things like that can be sold here in retail and then later brought out. Cheeses in deli, we already had mentioned that in the previous application, that we were going to preserve that element that exists today in the current retail establishment that's in that space. So for the hours where at 10 a.m. till lunchtime, this place is going to look very, very much like a retail space. The traffic patterns, the types of activities here will definitely be that. At 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, it's going to look a lot more like a restaurant with wine tasting in the back, right? So it is going to timeshare fairly effectively. And we think we're making exceedingly good use of space. This entire back end of of the space here is dedicated to wine retail, wine tasting, and wine sales. If you just visually look at that and this space here and assume that some part of the food prep area is contributing to what's being sold in retail, we think it's about as effective mix as we can get and still make the numbers work for this place.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Yes, Councilman Spector,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the staff.
please.
And this might exactly be what the mayor has requested, but what I'm asking staff to examine is, should this council require a brick wall, a new CUP, and no delay in timing. So I'm just asking staff to play around with the imponderables, and thank you.
Thank you. Would the staff wish to play around at this point, or? Okay.
As everyone in the audience can see, that's what staff's been doing the last few minutes while council's been chatting with the applicants. One of the ideas, there's a couple suggestions that were in the staff report. One of the proposals that staff could present to the council tonight is, if council were inclined to approve a CUP tonight, a separate CUP, give staff clear direction on the conditions and the items that have been up for discussion. The matter could be continued to a date certain. Staff still thinks that we would need time to work with the applicant to make sure that they were in agreement with the newly drafted conditions. Provide public notice so that everyone in the community knew that a new separate CUP was coming back. It would be a standalone, and could return to this council no later than October 17th as a consent calendar item for final review and approval of the conditions.
That makes sense. So October 17, Madam Attorney, that would be basically the staff would work with whatever recommendations or parameters the council enacts tonight, and then in the course of the next, well, it'll be like 4 weeks, then we would be able to return for what you consider almost a consent without having to go back through the public process unless requested.
Could be placed, as long as there was public notice, we believe that it could be placed on the consent calendar with the option that council or a member of the public could always pull it for discussion if they still had questions or concerns.
Okay. All right. We have a question from Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions for staff. One would be, if we did what the town attorney just suggested, what would be the additional cost to the applicant? And then the other question would be, would the operating agreement still be necessary, or could that be part of the CUP instead?
Staff would recommend that the operating agreement be part of the new conditional use permit, not necessarily with the condition regarding the kitchen and cooking facility. In regards to the cost for the applicant, that is contained in your desk item, and let me just grab my copy. Staff would recommend that we collect the difference between the CUP modification fee and a new conditional use permit fee, and that difference is $2,164.29. Or council does have the discretion to modify those fees, either from taking in just a portion or none at all.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Leonardis?
One more question for staff. Earlier, you were going to check on the rootstock community benefit. Did you ever get around to doing that?
We did, and they did not trigger community benefit, so there was none. And we don't have any comparable recent example at this time.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions for our applicant? All right, seeing none, if you want to take a seat, we'll offer the opportunity to speak to the rest of our public. Anyone in our audience tonight wish to speak to this item? Please indicate that now. All right, then I invite the applicant back up to rebut anything you said at this point. If you've got nothing to say, then we'll close the public hearing. And I look to the council for discussion, clarification, or a motion. Councilwoman Spector.
I've asked a lot of questions, so I don't have any more questions. I'm going to try a motion.
All right, thank you.
And I know that you will all listen intently because it's going to have some modifications from what staff has before us, and I'll try and get through them as clearly as possible. I move to make the required findings in Attachment 1 and approve conditional use permit U11006. Shall I start with that, or shall I continue going?
You can start with that. It requires a motion, and the motion's been made. Is there a second? Mr. Leonardis?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and this is to make the required findings as indicated in Attachment 1 of the conditional use permit U11006. Now, I'd ask the attorney any clarification on this, because there were alternatives presented, and that was the initial recommendation. That particular finding, Attachment 1, contains the conditions or the required findings as appropriate to this application, even if we move forward with alternatives in the conditional use permit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So we have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? Yes.
I'm confused because my reading of this is that maybe I'm not confused, but my reading of this is that the conditional use permit that you're moving to approve is to allow a single use permit for the entire property. Is that the intent?
May I answer that?
Please.
Yes. And that's why I was asking about whether you want both of them together, because if you go to the second prong of the proposed motion, it references Attachment 14. Attachment 14 is the resolution that modifies the CUP. At that point, I was going to move to not modify, but to give a new CUP. And then I was going to have either a separate motion or a continuing on motion with regard to Attachment 14A, Exhibit 8 to 14, which would modify some of these conditions. So there are a lot of layers, and that's why I asked if I should start with one in a vacuum.
All right. Madam Attorney, did you understand that question? It seems to me that if indeed the conditional use permit U11006, as noted by the motion maker, is inadequate, then we can ask for withdrawal of the motion and continue.
You have a couple of ways of proceeding. You could make one global motion to approve a separate CUP, go through each of the conditions, spell out all of the considerations for council, as we indicated, giving staff very clear direction, since staff will need to redraft the resolution, the CUP conditions, as opposed to referring to those in the packet. Those would be the basis for it. The findings are generally going to be the same for any CUP, and so council can rely on the findings that have been suggested by staff, but it would be probably cleaner in this case, since staff anticipates significant changes from what's in the packet, that council make the motion as one with all the different layers. If this council's more comfortable with separate, then perhaps the initial motion needs to be not for necessarily the CUP application as set forth in staff's proposal, but as proposed by the applicant or as more clearly defined by Councilmember Spector.
All right, then can I ask the maker of the motion if she wishes to withdraw the motion or alter the motion, and we'll ask the seconder as well.
Right, and I do know how I want to go forward, and I will withdraw that motion.
Mr. Leonardis as the seconder?
Yes.
All right, so that motion has been withdrawn, and I'm going to turn it back to Councilwoman Spector.
Yes, I'm going to move to make the required findings, attachment 1, and approve a conditional use permit. I'm going to move to approve the resolution attachment 14, asking that that portion of the resolution that identifies U11006 be deleted, and that the second paragraph of the whereas, where it references a modification, that would be changed because this would be a new CUP. And then also adopt the conditions of approval shown in Exhibit A to Attachment 14 with the following modifications.
Could I ask the motion maker for a second? Let's go back and make sure that we are all on the same page when it comes to each of these items. So, again, from the first modification that you're making, okay, would you specify again page and document?
The first modification I made was to approve a CUP that was not U11006, but whatever number the new CUP would be.
All right.
The second modification would be to approve the resolution that is attachment 14, but which will be modified to contain a new CUP number, and which will also, in the second paragraph of whereas, where it references a modification to a CUP, instead be revised to reflect that there will be a new CUP.
All right, could you hold just 1 second? And staff, are we picking this up? Okay, continue.
And then move to approve the conditions of approval on Exhibit A of Attachment 14 with the following modifications. Beginning on paragraph 5, required retail space, I would move to amend that pursuant to our desk item, second page, paragraph 3. Where that provision is modified, and it's modified because the current 520 square feet of retail space, as it was originally drafted, did not specify that it could not be solely wine, whereas the staff's new required retail space provision has a provision that has a requirement for market items.
All right, everyone's still on board on this? Okay.
And I actually don't know where this is in here, but I agree with I think it was Ms. McNutt or whoever, maybe it was the mayor. I would not add the additional seats. I think it went up to 35. I would not add those seats, although I don't know where in this paperwork that provision is contained.
That's a good question. Number 8, I think, is the number of seats. And it does have the 35. Item 8, you see it on top?
Right, and so that would be
31?
Yeah, that would be reduced to 31. I would leave the community benefit as is at $2,500. And I would also ask staff or the mayor, I'm going to modify any provision with regard to the wall between the two uses, and where is that currently?
It's not included in the conditions of approval.
There you go.
All right. Then I would add a condition, whether it's in the resolution and/or conditions of approval, providing that the current opening between the two adjacent uses will be closed, and with a wall, which I assume is going to be a brick wall, but I'll just say a wall.
Okay.
And that's all of my motion at this point.
All right. Any comment on the fee schedule, to the maker of the motion, the fee schedule for the additional costs of the conditional use permit?
That's actually an item that I would look to council's input, but for the purposes of this motion and to keep us going forward, I will go along with staff's suggestion of paying the difference between the two applications for a total of $2,164.29.
All right. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second?
We have a second from Ms. McNutt. Discussion? Yes.
Yeah. So I would like to throw out an idea to council, and this is regards to community benefit, which is bothersome to me because although it is still in our policy, we recently had a study session between Planning Commission and Council talking about making changes to that policy going forward and really focusing on traffic mitigation fees when they're warranted, and eliminating the additional community benefit of things like benches and banners that aren't specifically improvements to traffic. So since we're headed in that direction, and since we are surprising the applicant with an additional fee for separating out this CUP, I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to, in this case, eliminate the community benefit and let them pay the fee. So it's almost exactly the same amount of money, and that way it's not additional out-of-pocket for them. I'm feeling that it's a little unfair at this point. I mean, maybe much earlier in this, we all should have recognized that this needed to be a separate CUP, so we're kind of surprising them. So that was just an idea to throw out for council for your opinion.
All right, council, yes. Madam Spector?
The maker of the motion would have no problem eliminating the provision for community benefit, because I know we're not there yet on our policy, but I do think a community benefit that is required because of the increased traffic should have something to do with traffic, and so I am willing, as part of this motion, to delete the provision requiring community benefit, which is paragraph 18.
All right. Are you going to include that as a revise of your motion?
Yes, I am.
The seconder of the motion?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I'm going to agree with that when we get to the vote, because I do think that's fair and appropriate, particularly given the fact that we're in the midst of a discussion of how we are going to deal with community benefit in the long run. You know, we have obviously attempted appropriately on the staff's part to exact what is currently in our language, but I do think the additional conditional use permit for the applicant's willingness to do what the council is interested in achieving is appropriate. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Spector.
And I would further add to my motion that this matter be returned to us as soon as possible, no later than the second meeting in October, as a consent item.
Thank you. And that would also be for the maker of the second.
Yes.
Can I ask a question of staff? We've designated the second meeting in October. Is there any possibility, given the specificity of this motion and the issues that seem to be already agreed upon by the applicant, is there any issue that would prevent us from seeing this again the first meeting in October, since, is this an extra, we have an extra week in there since, no, I guess we don't. So that would be October 3. Any possibility at all, or are we blocked because of noticing demands and those kinds of things, Madam Attorney?
The staff recommends that this matter be noticed as a new CUP, and that would be consistent with the general guidelines. We may be able to, and that the date for publication is premised on the town publishing in the Los Gatos Weekly. There have been some circumstances where town has published with the applicant's agreement and additional costs to publish in a daily newspaper such as the Mercury News, and then just additionally publish a courtesy notice in the weekly, like the week before the hearing. So if council wanted to direct staff to work with the applicant to bring it back no later than the 17th, staff and the applicant could work on the logistics and the costs involved to see if it could be brought back any sooner.
I'd like to see a nod of the heads from the applicant if this is the case, if the staff can work with you with our noticing parameters and with their ability to frame this in the next couple of weeks, and we can put it on our October 3 agenda. That would be agreeable to you. It might cost you a few more dollars to get to the weekly or whichever newspaper we're going to notice in, but we're getting nods for that one as well. Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Leonardis.
This is one small detail, but in a previous hearing, this is regarding Exhibit A of Attachment 14. We classified nachos as a meal, and here we're calling it an appetizer. I don't know if this is relevant to this applicant's food, but for consistency's sake, it might be beneficial to cross out nachos as an appetizer and consider that a meal.
Were you intending Italian nachos by any chance? No. Okay. I'm not really that familiar with how we've specified our small food-like substances that are not food, but you obviously have an angle on this, Mr. Leonardis? When we were approving Pedro's, we made it a point, I think it was Councilwoman McNutt singled out nachos, and she said that should be stricken from the policy because nachos can be a meal. Mm-hmm. So it's my only, just for consistency's sake. Good recall. I'm sure it had nothing to do with Pedro's, that it was singled out, but all right, so we will strike nachos. Is that agreeable? Yes. Well, I know it's agreeable to you. I'm asking the maker of the motion, yeah.
What paragraph are we looking at?
Madam Attorney, were you wanting to say something? No, okay.
What paragraph am I looking at here?
That would be 9, where it says appetizers such as.
So we're deleting nachos? I'll tell you what, to move this along.
It's gotten down to this.
Yeah,
okay.
To move this along, if the seconder wants to delete nachos, I will delete nachos.
Okay.
Sure, why not?
Okay, I think we've got agreement on that one. Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I'm going to support the motion. I just wanted to point out something that catches me as something that we need to address, which is if in this particular marketplace type of a concept, if a sandwich was made at 10 o'clock and wrapped up and put in the case, and I went in and bought it at noon, it's retail. If the same sandwich isn't made until I arrive, it's restaurant. And hence the reason we are coming into an issue of square footage and that kind of thing, and I appreciate the applicant being flexible on this. I think this is something we're going to come across in the future, we're going to have to deal with, but I think that the square footage number that we ended up with, I'm comfortable with, and I'm comfortable with the breakdown of it. So I just want to make sure that that's implicit in the motion, that as that map was shown, the floor plan of the percentage of retail versus restaurant, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, other comments? Yes, Ms. Spector?
Since the vice mayor was sort of looking at the maker of the motion here, yes, I am comfortable with the rendering of square footage provided to us by the applicant.
Okay, I want to say something, and then we're going to ask Ms. McNutt to make a comment. I think we have to be really careful of nitpicking and make sure that we come up with what our intent is, what is our goal. And the goal was to create a different kind of environment here, an environment that would appeal to our community, that would allow us to make sure that we are not just creating another restaurant space, because that does violate our orientation towards new restaurants. And so we're not calling this a restaurant. And I think what we're attempting to do is say, and it's not really a restaurant. And our expectation would be, you've heard us clearly tonight, that's not our intention. This should not be a restaurant. It should not be identified as such. When our community comes in to partake of the great offerings that you're going to give them, they need to know this is a different space. And so everything that you do as you use the space you have available to you should be done with that in mind, that we're trying to create a space that is a unique space, something that we do not have at this point, but is kind of a new brand that we're bringing to the community. And as you look at your use of space, even as you look at the additional space you might gain as that doorway goes away, the message that you communicate by the way you set up your display, by the way you set up all of the space in the facility, needs to really make sure that that's communicated. That's what we're seeing. And we as council will, I'm sure, be there to partake. And that's the first thing I'm going to say as I walk in the door. I want to see what this is. And as I do, I am assuming, given the great work you've done with our staff, to dialogue about this and to take the recommendations we've made and to really put them in a form that we can look at and say, it was a good job. It was strenuous. It took a little longer than you expected, I know. Sometimes happens that way in town, but the end product is a much different product than when we started this discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Based on a couple of comments, I wanted to clarify the square footage on retail. In the current conditions, it's 520. What they showed us on their chart that people seem to like is 450. So which number did you actually want to have included?
Go ahead.
I assumed it was 520.
Madam McNutt? You're the mayor.
That's fine. Since there was praise for the chart, I just wanted to make sure that we all understood that that's different.
Okay, now my question is that 520 calculation, is it compatible with the numbers that we see in front of us in the proposal that has been forwarded tonight by the applicant? Please.
Well, Mr. Wasserman's not here to do my math for me, but I think that means they're going to have to come up with another 70 square feet of retail somewhere.
And as the seconder of the motion, is that do you need to have a response from the applicant before we can make that determination?
No, I'm fine with 520. I just wanted to make sure we were all knowing what we were doing.
Okay. 10 foot by 7 foot? Okay. I can see that right there where that doorway is. All right, we have a motion, we have a second, we have copious discussion. Yes, and we have a question from Ms. Rooney.
We have just a couple of items now that we would like some clarification. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Going back to alcoholic beverage service, we wanted to clarify that the town council would like food service required as opposed to just available as proposed by the applicant.
Okay, turn to the maker of the motion.
The answer is yes.
Seconder?
Yes.
All right, next question.
The next question is clarifying or confirming that the council is not placing the kitchen and cooking equipment condition that would require removal of that equipment should there be any change of use or ownership.
Yes. I am not requiring it.
And Madam McNutt?
Change of use is an odd phrase for me. Change of ownership, no, but change of use,
Right.
that wouldn't make any sense. So just change of ownership?
Well, if we're not requiring the kitchen condition, we don't have to look at the language, but it was put in there to cover any concerns that the council may have.
Okay.
And then the last item was on the resolution and the attachments. If the maker and seconder of the motion would be okay with changing the name of the restaurant referenced in that resolution from Simpatico to their new name.
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. Anything else?
And on the third page of the resolution, similar to what was changed on the first page, changing the application number from U-11 to -006 to a new number.
Yeah, the motion was to include all references.
Okay. Thank you.
And can I ask one more question of the maker of the motion? Under item 9, alcoholic beverage service, where we talk about appetizers, popcorn, excluding nachos, pretzels, etc., are not food. They're not ducks either. So I'm thinking that we might want to say for purposes of this, particular item in the conditional use permit. We have language that says that in other places, but we discovered this when we did our discussion about the entertainment policy. And so some phrase in there, editorial
Mr. Mayor, I
convenience.
think what you're looking for, they're not food for the purposes of defining a meal.
That's
But they
correct.
are food.
They are food. They will remain food, but for purposes of defining a meal. Thank you. That's it then. All right, then I hear no further discussion. I'll call the question. With all that Councilwoman Spector indicated and the staff's agreement that they have it all down, I will not repeat what we just went through, but I'll ask for a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Congratulations. Okay. No. Oh. I believe our government students. Yeah. You saw government in action. Okay. All right, that brings us back then to the one item that was pulled from the consent calendar, and that is item number 3. And item number 3 is the housing element. The housing element request on the part of staff is in front of us. So I would ask members of our public who would wish to speak to this item, please forward to our clerk a buff card that you filled out so that we can get to you when we have the public testimony. I believe it was Councilwoman McNutt who asked to pull this item, And Ms. Rooney, are you going to be the staff person?
I am the staff
involved?
person.
Okay. And let's see if we've got the house in order. All right. Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So we all remember last year when we spent so many hours struggling over both the general plan update and the housing element. And in particular, we struggled with the affordable housing overlay zone concept and the wording on that. And I thought we had come up with something that was somewhat acceptable to us. It's gone off to the state. It's come back with some additional language that makes me uncomfortable. And so I'm talking about page 26 of the housing element, the redlined version. And I've had a chance to talk to Ms. Rooney, and she'll give you the same explanation that she gave me, but I just feel like maybe we need to make another attempt at working with the state to come up with a happy medium. So in particular, the two areas that are of concern to me is the density at a minimum of 20 units per acre by right without discretionary review, and allowing for building height of at least 3 stories.
Can I ask you a question? What was the page number on that?
26.
Okay. Okay. I wonder, staff. I think we've got it. You're going out to the foyer to take care of our students. All right. Proceed.
That concludes my statement.
All right. So.
Were we not listening?
Surprise. Well, I just always think there's more.
There often
So
is.
the only issue you're speaking about is on page 26.
Yeah, it's just,
only
it's
issue.
it's very severe and harsh to say, even if the state is saying this is what's required, to say a density of 20 units per acre without discretionary review and building heights of at least 3 stories on the areas designated for potential housing overlay zones.
Okay, so this building heights and the review process.
And the
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Well,
Mr. Mayor, I
yes,
have
Ms.
I have 2 options for you. There appears to be, based on public comments we received that were sent to you in a desk item, that there is some misperceptions of the public of what is happening this evening. So I do have some prepared comments. It'll take me about 5 minutes to go through that. It gives a little more history than just the answer to the 2 questions,
Okay.
or alternatively, staff could just answer those 2 questions. So it would be the council's discretion.
I would recommend you put it in context for
Okay,
our public
Great.
in
Well,
5
and-
minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Please note that you do have a desk item that does have 2 comments that were received by the public over the last couple of days. It also has an exhibit. It's figure 6.1 that was inadvertently omitted from the red line of the housing element, and that's simply shows the 6 properties that have the overlay applied to them. As the council is well aware, this is a product of 2.5 years of extensive and careful town staff, planning commission, general plan committee, and town council review that involved public review at each step of the process. All meetings were duly noticed and advertised over the last 2.5 years. Between late 2008 and November 2010, the town conducted 8 general plan committee reviews, 8 separate meetings, 1 joint planning commission and town council meeting, and 1 planning commission public hearing and 1 town council public hearing. 11 meetings altogether. The planning commission unanimously recommended approval of this document, and the town council unanimously approved the document. The town had 3 public review drafts that were on the town website over the last approximately 2 years that were there for public review also. Subsequent to the town council approval on November 1st, 2010, the State Department of Housing Community Development, that we call HCD, conducted their third and final review of the housing element. That concluded around April of 2011. And the items that they had directed changes to are contained on attachment 1 of your staff report. As the council is well aware, the town is required to prepare a housing element on a regular cycle. The state issues a total number of units that must be collectively planned for in each jurisdiction. The Bay Area Association of Bay Area Governments develops a methodology for allocating those units, and that allocation is based on a mathematical equation as well as criteria. And just to give you some examples of the criteria that they look at: water and sewer capacity, land suitability for urban development or conversion to residential uses, whether lands within the jurisdiction are protected by state and federal government, such as open space lands, market demand, and job growth. So that's some of the criteria that they look at. This resulted in Los Gatos in the 2007 to 2014 cycle receiving a RHNA, your housing numbers, it's the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, we commonly call that ARENA, of 521 units that need to be planned for, and they're distributed over 5 income categories. What's important to note, and I know the council is well aware of this, that the town's responsibility is that we plan for these units. We're not responsible for building these units. We're not responsible for ensuring that the units are built. We're responsible for ensuring that we have land that's suitable, that's zoned appropriately, that we've removed governmental constraints to the best of our ability, which is where the use by right comes into play. The RHNA does require, again, us to have suitably zoned lands, allow for the number of housing units that need to be allocated, the RHNA allow for that, and then remove any governmental constraints. The town utilized the affordable housing overlay zone concept. The basic reason we did this is because we're approaching a built-out community. If we were to use a traditional method, then we would have rezoned probably up to about 100 acres of land from low or moderate density, medium density residential to higher density, and then applied our inclusionary housing requirement of 20% to obtain our 521 units. Instead, we developed the affordable housing overlay zones, which are, I think, built-out communities. It's a kind of an avant-garde. It's new. Built-out communities are trying to find ways of accommodating the RHNA without having to rezone land. In this, it resulted in only 26.3 acres that potentially could be rezoned. The town is not under obligation to rezone these lands. When you have an overlay applied, the developer, the property owner, has the right to either develop it under the overlay zone or under the base zone district. We don't have to go in and rezone it, unlike if we were to go through a traditional process where we did look at a larger area and rezone it. Over the next year, the General Plan Committee will be responsible for developing standards and design criteria for each of those affordable housing overlay zones. I anticipate that we'll have probably 3 or 4, one for the properties in the northern part of the community, one for the Oka Road properties, and one for the Dittos Lane properties. Because the Oka Road, for instance, they're very similar, so you wouldn't develop separate development standards. Although the state law prohibits the town from requiring a discretionary review such as a conditional use permit, and this is an important point, state law requires that the town not have a discretionary review such as a conditional use permit or planned development, the town does retain the ability to have an architectural and site review. Moreover, the town has the ability to require the project comply with objective, quantifiable, written development standards, conditions, and policies. Equally important, the town has the authority to require that the project undergo environmental review and be evaluated with CEQA to ensure that there's not any environmental impacts. The principal changes between the element the Town Council approved in November 2010 and the red line version are modification of Action HOU 2.1, which allows a property owner to develop the AHOZ by right. Something I even forgot when I went back and I was putting together my speaking points was when the Planning Commission and Town Council saw this at the study session in October last year, we discussed the use by right. It was already something that HCD had told staff that we would be required to comply with, and there's actually language in that staff report that discussed that. So while this is still difficult for the council, I think that in the end, when the element was approved, the council had the confidence that the general plan committee will be able to develop the development standards and the design criteria that will mitigate the concerns of a use by right. Another item, or same action item, HOU 2-1, was also revised to require a minimum of 50% of the units of the AHOC be affordable to moderate and below income levels. And then also that the 3 development standards, of which one was height, the 3-story height, were also added. As I indicated to Councilmember McNutt, when the town does develop the development standards, I can foresee those being supplanted with what's in the housing element right now. We will have to go through a general plan amendment process. We're going to be developing criteria for each of those zones, and those development standards would then be in the housing element. This I looked at more as HCD saying, if you do not develop those standards, then you will need to comply with this. But they were fully aware that we would be going back and developing our own development standards. Action AHOU 2-2 was also added, and HOU 2.2 states that until the AHOZ standards are adopted, an AHOZ designated property applicant will be allowed to use the incentives identified in the AHOZ sites, apply the town's density bonus program, apply the state's density bonus program, and the town will expedite the review. Well, it's important to note that any applicant right now can apply for the town's density bonus program as well as the state's density bonus program. So those are already granted. The only thing that differs now is that it has the language that an expedite review process would be required. And we were expecting that anyhow. And finally, the other substantive item that was added in that between November and April was HOU, I keep saying AHOU, sorry, HOU 6.7, which requires the town to conduct a study to evaluate parking space requirements for the RM zone district. All the other changes that are contained on attachment 1 are minor or technical in nature. So staff is recommending that the council reaffirm the November 1st, 2010 approval of the housing element. HC directed changes in attachment 1 are consistent with state housing law. Consequently, staff strongly does not believe there's any negotiation room and that we can further modify these. It's also important to note we have 2 years left of this housing element. It's highly unlikely, I believe it's highly unlikely in today's economic climate that we're even going to see any of these properties, AHOC sites, developed. During one of the biggest residential markets that we've seen in history, which was the last cycle, so roughly 2002 to 2007, it was a 5-year cycle, only 25% of our units were ever built. So it's unlikely in the next 2 years we're going to see many, if any, of these units built. As noted in the staff report, with a certified housing element, the town will continue to be eligible for certain affordable housing program grants, maintain the authority to make land use decisions or approve development applications, and ensures the element complies with state law. Moreover, and this is really equally more important, and this is something the council hasn't heard before because this is just brand new, which is happening right now, with the combining of the ARENA process and the Sustainable Community Strategies process, the SCS, MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and ABAG staff are recommending, and I feel very strongly that this will end up happening, is that all transportation funding, future transportation funding that is allocated from the federal government to MTC to VTA to the local jurisdictions will require that you have a certified housing element. Staff just prepared a letter that was sent off to MTC staff concerning a couple of other criteria that was included, but not the certified element because we had that. But that is at risk if we don't have a certified element. Lastly, I just wanted to note that Councilmember McNutt also brought to our attention that when we eliminated the Honda site because it had a pending application, so we eliminated it from the AHOZs, there was a paragraph on page 6.9 of the technical appendix that also should have been eliminated that described the Honda site. So if the council were to approve this, we would be making that additional modification of removing that paragraph. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so do you wish to reiterate your questions, Ms. McNutt, and then get to the specific responses?
No, I don't want to reiterate my questions. I just want to ask council if I'm being an alarmist here and we're stuck with this language, or if anyone else is uncomfortable with it and thinks we should try to do something about it.
Okay. Now, we are going to listen to our public in a second, but this should be in the nature of clarification. Yes.
Yes, for clarification, I do not believe Ms. McNutt is being an alarmist, and it's not clear to me what latitude or discretion, if any, we have. For example, we know that the town is going to develop development standards and design criteria, but how much latitude do we have? If we're told we have no discretionary review, and it has to be at least 3 stories, how, for example, could we adopt design criteria of 2 stories?
Again, I believe strongly that when we adopt, HCD was well aware that we were going to go back and develop the design criteria and development standards for each of the AHOZs. And so I feel comfortable saying that when we go back and develop that, and we may determine in some locations, such as maybe the North Bay site or the courthouse site, maybe it is appropriate for 3 stories, maybe it's not. Oka Road, I could see that probably being more 2 stories, or maybe there is a 3rd story, it's set back. I think we have lots of alternatives to evaluate. The General Plan Committee will need to evaluate those. When we do develop that, those development standards will then replace what is in here, because we'd have to go through a general plan amendment to amend our housing element with those development standards. The one item I didn't mention, and I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, was the 20 units per acre, and I know that was a concern of Councilmember McNutt. The reason 20 units per acre is identified is because the state, they designate what type of community you are. We're considered a suburban community, and the state designates X amount of units per acre, and if you meet that, it's a threshold. They call it a threshold. If you meet the threshold, then you do not have to do extensive additional studies in your housing element to support your programs. And so it's called the default threshold. And so for a suburban community, 20 units per acre is the default threshold. So staff would recommend that we maintain that 20 units per acre. If we were to drop below that, and I would say we maintain the 20 units per acre overall. If we drop below that, we then we jeopardize being considered, and I'm sorry, I'm not clarifying myself very well. The reason the state says 20 units per acre, because there's a assumption or presumption that 20 units per acre is affordable by design. And so the reason why we are recommending that we stay at that 20 units per acre is because then I think we do put our housing element in jeopardy if we were to not maintain that standard.
All right, Jim, speak about discretionary review, because that's an additional piece of language that wasn't in the original approval that Commission and Council went through. The 20 units per acre was in the previous.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
But when it says by right without discretionary review, although we have ARC and SITE available to us, what is eliminated, or what is how is our ability to develop a property within our standards affected by this language that says right without discretionary?
So right now in our multifamily zone districts, a multifamily use is a conditional use permit. This housing element proposes that, well, in fact, the housing element has an action item to take a look at that one. But what this housing element proposes is for those 6 sites in the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, that the use by right be allowed, the CUP process would be removed. So the town would conduct architectural and site review. They would require environmental review where that is necessary. The town would have full discretion to apply conditions, standards, exactions, environmental mitigation, and the town would have the right to deny it if there's findings in the environmental review that warrant that, or if there's findings of health and safety issues, the town would have the right to deny that application. I would say your discretion is, in this case, probably density. We are recommending we stay at that 20 units per acre, and that's probably the limit of where we would lose discretion.
And that's the only factor you can see that is accommodated by that language, the removing of discretionary review? All the others exist? All the others continue to exist?
Well, I think our town has high standards, and I think those standards could be achieved if we build that into the affordable housing overlay zones. If we didn't have the criteria in there, then I feel it would be difficult to deny projects. If we have that high standard criteria in the housing element, as I believe the General Plan Committee envisioned that would occur, then I believe that we would have the right to deny it if they're not meeting that criteria.
All right, so in effect it says, in absence of criteria, then the applicant has almost full discretion.
I would say so, yes.
All right, but because we have the type of planning criteria that we do have and will continue to develop, then the discretion actually is limited by design.
Correct.
Okay. Yes.
So if we leave that language, knowing the pace of process for the next 18 months or so, or 2 years, if any application comes in, we are stuck with what is here.
So we actually have a year in which we have to adopt this criteria. We had a year from, actually, it's really more like 9 months that we have to have this done by June of 2012. If an application were to come in right now, then I would say that they would be able to follow what's in the housing element at this point, with the caveats that the HCD has added, or the additional requirements, shall we say. Environmental review would still be maintained, conditions of approval would still be maintained, but that design criteria or development standards would be defaulting to this or to the base zone district, whichever the applicant chose to develop under.
Okay, I'm going to ask Ms. Spector and then the Vice Mayor.
What if tonight we approve this without that new language that the state has given to us? The without discretion and at least 3 stories.
I believe the state would decertify us. It was strongly stressed to state that we're out of compliance with state law.
And then we couldn't do land use applications or get transportation funding.
The transportation funding's a potential. I think it's a pretty strong potential. The grant funding is an absolute. The grant funding for affordable housing, the ability for the state to terminate our ability to issue permits is legal. However, I'm not sure how often. I doubt that has been exercised that often. I think it has been exercised, but not often. So that's probably our worst consequences right now would be the potential of losing all transportation grants and definitely losing all affordable housing grants, and then not having a certified housing element, which gives the town the assurance it's in compliance with state law.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. So to answer Councilwoman McNutt's question, no, I don't think you're being alarmist. I have the same concerns. I want to throw a hypothetical at you. So first of all, we're 4 years into a 7-year plan. Is tonight a deadline of some sorts that we have to adopt this?
Technically, we were supposed to have this adopted by June 2009. So we are now well over 2 years past the deadline. I will say, however, many jurisdictions were late. I think most of them have completed their processes now, though.
Okay. So we're opening a window, basically. Why have we not had our own design standards put in place before this got to us?
It's just whenever you adopt the general plan, you have lots of implementation measures, and this is just another one of the implementation measures. We have a lot to implement with this general plan, and we have pretty defined or limited resources. We have started working, so the council understands, we have started working on the housing element implementations. I have a staff member working on it right now, but it's a lot of work. We anticipate starting the general plan committee process probably November would be the perfect timing. However, we're starting to get into the holidays, but we might be able to put together a meeting for early November to start that process, but it will take, I suspect, probably until close to June. At least it's going to take probably 5 months to get that done.
Please.
All right, so let me just play a hypothetical with you for a moment. If I know it's been a sore spot in the community, so let me use Ditto's Lane. Even though the town owns the land, let's say we didn't, and we adopted this, and somebody came with an application next month to build 20 units per acre and 3 stories on that property, we would have no way of stopping that kind of density and height. Is that correct?
We still have discretion because we have environmental review, and as the council may remember, that was environmental review issues CEQA issues were raised with the previous Ditto's projects, so we still have environmental review. Also, an application has to go through rigorous review before it's ever deemed complete. And it at times will take months before an application is deemed complete because of requirements the applicant has to comply with, studies that have to be prepared. So in reality, it could take as much time as we really have to get this adopted, to get a complete application. If the application was, this was adopted prior to the application being complete, they would have to comply with it. But again, I don't want you to rely upon that because I think you're right. If an application was submitted and all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed, then they would still be subject to architectural review, and they would be subject to environmental review, and they'd be subject to all of our standard conditions and requirements.
But we would have no control over the height or density beyond those?
We would have up to 3 stories at this point.
Up to, or this says
I'm sorry, 3 stories, yeah.
At a minimum?
Let me look at that.
It says at least.
It says at least 3 stories.
Well, the assistant town manager wanted me to remind you that the density at Ditto's of the former project was actually over 20 units. It was more at 24, I believe, units per acre. So this would be a lower density than what was at the Ditto's, at the former Ditto's project.
I understand, but that was an application, had never got even to the council level. So I am concerned about this, and I'll let it go to get to our public.
Okay, any other comments at this point? Any other questions for staff? All right, we have some people who'd like to speak to this issue. And the first card I have is Mr. Andy Wu. Mr. Wu, again, state your name for our television viewers. And you do have 3 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
And Mr. Wu, will you speak into the microphone, please?
I forgot to do that. A little tired. Well, I think Plato said this, a wise man speaks when he has something to say, a fool just says something for the sake of saying it. I originally had a prepared speech, but this council has addressed most of those concerns, so let me just say this. I believe the same alarms that are going off in this council's head has gone off in many members' heads as well. I'm here speaking as a member and a representative of the Los Gatos Community Alliance. And two of our fellow members have submitted emails that were attached to the council agenda report. I'm not going to review what's stated in that report, but what troubles me most is the mandatory language that essentially removes the public's right to comment or to dissent from any proposed project that is going to be, that is or will potentially be submitted on any of the affordable housing overlay zones. I searched for something relevant to say with respect to what was coming up in this agenda item, and I was looking through the Brown Act, and not knowing too much about the Brown Act, I had to actually do some research. And I ran across a May 2007 memo that was published by the Attorney General's office, which basically states to me as a citizen that the Brown Act guarantees that I have a right to be noticed of any business conducted by a municipality, and I have the opportunity to be heard in that decision-making process. What I read as what the state is trying to mandate with its redlining of the proposal before the council tonight is removing the public's right to make any comments. Just one quote from Roman Senator Marcus Tullius Cicero, and he stated, "Silient inem legis inter arma," and that's the classical pronunciation, not the liturgical one. I had to practice that a little bit. And what that says in Latin is, silent is the rule of law in times of war. As far as I know, we are not engaged in any sort of civil war in this nation or in this municipality. However, what I believe the state is trying to do is to make war upon its citizens by forcing this town to adopt something which is unreasonable and leaves this council with no discretion. And since I have 10 seconds, I'd just like to thank the town council as the member of the College Hill community for repaving Euclid and Jones. Thank you very much, after 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. Next speaker is Richard Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Richard Allen. I live at 172 College Avenue in Los Gatos. I'm also a member of the Los Gatos Community Alliance. I've read the staff report on the consent item number 3, and I respectfully request that the consent item 3 on the ratification of the November 1st, 2010 approval of the 2007-14 housing element be referred to the Planning Commission before coming back to council. Some of the changes in that document are substantial, and it's not clear to me how they will change the current procedures and affect future applications for housing developments. By referring this back to the Planning Commission, it can follow the normal public review process and give staff more time to fully explain the effect of the changes. Neither the staff report nor the attachments clearly explain the requirements of the state density bonus law and which parts are mandatory for the town to follow and which are at the town's discretion. I do understand that the town is required to adopt an ordinance that's consistent with state law. So some of those changes, the town has no control over. However, the town does not have to agree to grant density bonuses over the amount required by state law. Part of what is not clear is whether or not we are giving the developers of affordable housing both a state and a town bonus. I also understand that the update to the general plan was developed with public participation. However, questions remain that a Planning Commission review could help to answer before adoption. We are already late in this process, so what's the rush for doing it tonight? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Lee Quintana.
Hi. I think much of what I was going to say has already been said. However, I will try and emphasize a few things. One is the question of what the state law requires in terms of a density bonus, what the town's density bonus is, and whether a project is entitled to both of those, because if they reach the maximum of both of those, it can be up to a 55% density increase rather than the minimum that the state law would require, which is 35%. The other question I have is when on the parcels that are zoned with the overlay, if they're developed as the overlay with the minimum 20%, or excuse me, 20 dwelling units per acre, can an applicant still come in and ask to be processed under the state density bonus law, in which case he would be entitled to a bonus above that 20% of 35% if he meets the criteria, and whatever the town's criteria would be too, which would boost that up, which gets to the point of the at least 3 stories. Removing the CUP is a discretionary issue. However, I'm confused about where the discretion comes in for the overlay zone itself. The applicant chooses which one he wants to do. And where the CEQA review comes in, because the state law doesn't excuse the jurisdictions from doing adequate CEQA. So if a project is going to have an impact, it needs to be analyzed under CEQA anyway. At what point does that come? The other question I had was that it's not clear to me which of the items in the housing element apply to only the affordable housing overlay and which apply to all other residential zones, and where the discretion comes in. Because it's my understanding that if an applicant comes in and asks to be processed under the state law, the town really does not have very much discretion, even at ANS. So those are my questions. And I would ask that you can refer this back to the Planning Commission so that we can get more clarification, or at the very least continue it so we can get more clarification on those points. And so there's more understanding about what the issues in the law are.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. And our last card is Janice Folk. Anyone else wish to speak to this? Don't hesitate to bring one of these buff cards up to our clerk, Ms. Folk.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I appreciate the council's removal of this item from the consent agenda. I thought it was far too large of an issue to be passed along with the other relatively minor matters before you this evening. I share Mr. Wu's concern over the removal of the public from the remainder of the process, given the new wording provided by the state, as echoed by some of you. And I would also just feel more comfortable with our town's governance if we spent at least as much time on high-density housing and all the impacts of that housing, the traffic, the schools, the infrastructure of our entire community, as we spend on the definition of nachos as a snack or a meal. So this evening, the nachos were really winning out here until the very last minute, so I appreciate your consideration of this as a very serious matter. Our general plan has gone on for this long, as you said, without a housing element, and anchoring it on this very controversial issue is concerning to me, so thank you.
Thank you. Again, anyone else wish to speak? Then I think we will close the public hearing and look to council for clarification. Yes, Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I do want to reassure the public that last year we spent many, many hours on the housing element separate from the general plan. So housing element's still winning in the balance between that and nachos. I think To me, the two dates that are most interesting are June 2009, when this thing was supposed to be certified, and June 2012, when supposedly we're going to have the criteria. And I'm wondering if a solution would be to continue this to sometime in the future, a date uncertain, so as to narrow the gap between whatever it is we end up doing with this and when we actually have the criteria. So January sounds like a good time to me. So we're down to, maybe we'll even move that June date back to April and May and get those done. So what do we think of that idea, Council?
So you're not making that motion, you're just
No, it's for
throwing the idea
discussion
out.
purposes.
Okay. So comments, Mr. Vice Mayor?
I like that idea.
Okay.
I think anything we can do to close that window a little bit to give us as much control as the state will allow us to have locally, as opposed to dictated from Sacramento, is to our benefit. And if you wanted to make that a motion, I would second it, or if you would like, I'll make a motion to continue this item to a date uncertain in the future.
Well, and you've made a motion, so we'll encourage a second, but I hope that we do have in the discussion portion some opportunity to clarify some more of these ideas. So we have a motion to continue this to a date uncertain with recommendations to staff to I'm sure, investigate further some of the questions that will arise. Do we have a second?
I'll second and see where the discussion goes.
All right. So we'll start with Ms. Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting the motion, but issues came up this evening, and even though I was on that general plan committee and then on the town council that has actually been looking at this document for years, and that has been struggling, if not arguing, as has the mayor, with the mandates that the state has been placing upon us. But, so even though I've done all of that, issues came up this evening and have actually come up in the past that at some point I would like clarified. I don't know if it would be when this comes back before us at some indefinite time, or whether it's information to the general plan committee. For example, this density bonus and the state density bonus versus somebody else's density bonus. I have seen that issue floating around, and I don't know the answer. And so that would be something that I would like to be informed about. And so again, leaving it up to staff, whether this comes back, this kind of information comes back when this undefined housing element comes back to us, or at some other point, I would be interested in that information.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of comments for you, Ms. Rooney. My recollection from previous housing element approvals is that we did not have the language in those previous approved elements that included the minimum of and the discretionary review and the at least 3 stories. These are amendments to our housing element this time. You say that came straight from ACD, and the intent was, is this a tightening up at state level, or is this a reflection on this new concept of the housing overlay zone that we introduced this year? Because we didn't have housing overlay zones, as I recall, previously.
I would say that every cycle the state tightens it up even more and more. So I would suspect that in 2014, well, frankly, we're starting the process now. For the 2014 cycle, we're going to see even more restrictions. So yes, every cycle the state tightens it up more, and jurisdictions, if you want to say, are squeezed harder, more and more. And I think that's what's occurring now.
Okay. So this would be applicable to all agencies that are revising their housing elements at this time?
Well, various requirements. It just depends what an agency is proposing. So it's various requirements. The 20 units per acre, the default densities is applicable to every jurisdiction within California. Depends on what type of jurisdiction they are, if they're a suburban, or if they're an urban, or if they're a rural.
Right, and that 20 was in the previous approvals from the
Correct. That's been consistent
committee and
throughout.
the commission and the council.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, the use by right was discussed in the, no, staff knew going into the study session with the council back in October that the use by right was going to be an issue, and so we flagged that just to the overlay properties. It's not applying to any other. I think there was a question, does it apply across all of our zone districts? And no, it's just to the 6 affordable housing overlay sites. We have an action item that requires us to study removal of the conditional use permit process in the RM zone district. But what HCD required us to do at this point was just on those 6 AHOZ sites. And I would like to clarify one thing. I just want to double check in the RM zone district, and I did. And the height limitation in the RM zone district is 30 feet unless you have parking underneath, and that's 35. So I think we could change that to 30 feet if that helps the council. I don't think we're going in that direction, however, but I did want to make that comment.
Well, that would be an interesting change from
Well, I'm just following the RM zone district standards, which is what HCD required, so.
So I get the impression that if we had the specific criteria in place, that would mitigate or diminish the lack of control that this current language proposes to us.
That is my sense from what I'm hearing from the council. That's staff's belief, that if we have defined development standards and criteria, that would mitigate the concerns. And I think that's what why the council ultimately approved this back in November 2010, was because knowing that that language would be crafted.
Okay. I believe the vice mayor made reference to the timing on this, to miss it by 2 years. If we missed it by another 6 months, the sky will not fall, and we probably will not have an issue unless there were an applicant who would come forward. But the applicant would come forward in the previously approved language. Would that not be accurate? Because we've not submitted this language.
Depending upon tonight's action, that could be correct.
Okay. And then to the question raised regarding the density bonus, town versus state. How does that work out? What is?
So the town has a density bonus program. The state has a density bonus program. At one point, one of our action items is to develop. The state has a required density bonus program. We should have adopted a state density bonus ordinance probably about 6 years ago, and so it's on our list, and we're actually starting to work on the density bonus program right now. We had consultation with State Housing and Community Development because we do have a project, the first project in the town's history, to request. You have to request the state density bonus. You don't automatically have it granted to you. You have to request it. When you request it, it is granted to you. The state requires that. And you can layer. HCD said it's the jurisdiction's call on whether you layer that or not. And so you can layer that. It's really, when we develop our own ordinance, we'll have that conversation. Do we want to then eliminate the town's density bonus at that point and just adopt the state's program modified? Or do we want to continue having both? The General Plan Committee members on the council will remember we had a pretty extensive conversation about the differences between the towns and the states. And in some cases, the town offers a greater flexibility with affordable units, obtaining more affordable units, and in some cases the states does. I think the towns at the larger the project, the towns results in more affordable units. So we're going to have that conversation when we develop that ordinance, which staff is starting the research, has already started the research on that. I anticipate you will probably see that, a draft of that, probably sometime in early 2012.
So in Action HOU 2.2, that's the density bonus language. At this point in time, when you say layer, did that mean that the density bonus state and town would be combined or could be combined?
At this point in time, you can layer them, you can combine them, yes. Because the town doesn't have a state density bonus ordinance. So we have a town ordinance, the state has a required ordinance, so yes, you can combine those at this point in time until we develop our own density bonus ordinance that is compliant with the state's.
But up to this point, we have been acting under our own density bonus language, correct?
Correct, and it's.
Without challenge.
Correct.
Okay, the attorney wishes to speak.
Just for clarification, up until recently, the town has not had any applicants ask for the state density bonus. So we haven't really been violating state law. We just haven't ever been asked to process a project under the state density bonus law. And you've been applying the language in the general plan for projects with respect to density.
Well, I understand that there are two different pieces of language here, but from the HOU 2.2, where it says they can utilize the town's density bonus program as well as request exceptions consistent with the state density bonus program. Does that mean exceptions to the town's density bonus proposal?
No, that would be exceptions to development standards.
Okay, so it is actually a combination of both and that would be allowed by this language.
Correct.
Okay.
Until we adopt a density bonus ordinance, and at that point in time, the town council can decide whether to eliminate the town's density bonus language in the general plan. That's all we have is language in the housing element. We don't have an ordinance and we don't have a zoning code requirement. At that point, the town can craft it exactly how they would want that.
Okay. Yes, Ms. McNutt.
So it seems to me that the ideal scenario would be that we would get the revised housing element, the density bonus ordinance, and the criteria as a nice package all at once, sometime in early 2012. Yes?
If I might add to that, we can get the density bonus ordinance done faster than we can get the overlay language done. That's going to take probably a series, I'm going to guess, of 6 to 8 meetings with the GPC to get that language done. I would highly recommend that if we get the density bonus ordinance done, let's get that moving and not delay it. And I'm pretty sure we can't get that language done with the overlays done by early 2012. I really believe it's going to be mid-2012 on the overlays. I would recommend we move everything as fast as we can, but not hold anything up.
All right. Ms. Spector.
Mr. Mayor, when you say that it's going to take us until June of next year to do the overlay zones, and whatever it is, 6 meetings or whatever with the GPC, is part of that time because of the number of overlay zones? And I ask that because why couldn't we just do one, which will give us our framework, and move this along more quickly, rather than 3 different ones?
Staff's recommendation was based upon discussions with the General Plan Committee, and the General Plan Committee was, staff's belief, the direction from the General Plan Committee was, we really want to look at the neighborhoods in which each of these affordable housing overlay zones would be located and make sure that we're sensitive to those neighborhoods and we're reflective of the character of those neighborhoods. So it would be staff's recommendation based upon that we would look at these independently. I think the framework, what those AHOZs would include, would be consistent across the board. However, each one may have design criteria, development standards. The General Plan Committee and ultimately the council may feel that you apply a different development standard to South Bay than you to Oka Road. I think that's reasonable to assume that, and different to what you might apply on dittos. So although we can create the framework, coming up with the specifics, again, I think probably at least 2 to 3 meetings on each of those zones with the General Plan Committee. The other issue is that we don't have dedicated staff to this. I think you're probably looking at the staff member that will be doing this with the council and the general plan committee. So it's just a matter of having the ability to have the time to do that also. So again, I'm looking at probably optimistically spring 2012 of getting that done. But I think we can get the density bonus ordinance done much faster.
All right, I'm in agreement with Councilwoman Spector. As I look at the sites designated North 40, we will not know what the expectation is out on the North 40 for a period of time. Oka versus South Bay. South Bay is basically in office and R&D right now. The Los Gatos Courthouse, we are looking at eliminating our interest in that site. I guess my sense is I would rather move this faster than slower. It shouldn't take as long if we do generalized language that could be applicable in all situations. As we're proposing it, it seems to me that we will maybe resolve this by the time we start the next housing element revise. Maybe. And I know at that time, I think we're going for 7 years, correct? And that's the change. And I also know that in the Association of Bay Area Governments, there's a great deal of discussion because all the communities are having the same impact that we're having at this point. And so there is talk about looking at a different format for the RENA numbers. There's also the question of the new SB 375 demands for the build-out in the transportation corridors. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts right now. So my guess is that we've got to protect ourselves from the state and from what the state might do to us. So I would really recommend expediting this as much as possible, mostly to protect us, and not necessarily to assume that the final product will be exactly what we want. But I just don't like the being in the position where we are vulnerable to the off chance that someone might come in and say, I know what I want, and it's going to include both density bonuses, and I want to go at least 3 stories, and I want to do it without constraints. So that would be the issue for me for expediting the process. Okay. Any other comments from council? We have a motion to continue. Instruction to staff sufficient for this? Okay. Then I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. And that is it for tonight. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.